Welcome back, Dan. All right, I think we're going to have, I've got a screen full of books, and so I think we're going to go ahead and get going this morning. Hi, welcome back to the webinar series. I'm Marita Irby with Knowledge to Power Catalysts, and Catherine is off in training mode today, so I get to be your MC for the afternoon or morning, depending on what time you are joining us. And welcome to this fifth in our series about what it really means to center youth thriving, and really have a focus on adolescence, and we're talking like teenagers into young adulthood. And their drive to thrive really moves us towards a focus on the broader ecosystems that they navigate every day. In this series so far, we've really explored how our intuitive understanding of thriving can help us understand the more elusive concept of learning ecosystems, that complex, dynamic web of people, places, and possibilities that really shape young people's learning experiences. We kicked off by exploring how to even think about ecosystems, and Tom McKeever with the University of Pittsburgh really helped us think about that and look for signs that these ecosystems are healthy. And we also then, in that, called it a deep dive into what the learning ecosystem looks like in Pittsburgh, in the Pittsburgh region, and how Tyler and the team at Remake Learning have really actively engaged multiple systems and networks, including schools, to think about what a more vibrant learning ecosystem can look like throughout the region. Karen and I did a entry on how the research evidence and public opinion data that we pulled together in our piece on Too Essential to Fail really underscored the importance of schools in this ecosystem. And then Josh Actor with the Community Share helped us look at a human library and what it really means to draw on the assets of community members, educators, young people, and all that they have to bring in their full selves and their skills and competencies and areas of interest to a learning experience. The last session really kind of brought us up to today, where we spent time with the team at XQ and really did kind of an interactive session with XQ Institute's work to reinvent high schools, and how they, as a part of that, really tested out tools and resources that help you design powerful learning experiences that are bringing together and integrating academic and cognitive, social, emotional competencies that young people are really working to develop as they prepare for both now and next. That brings us right up to the door of today's conversation and this incredible group of folks that we have to unpack this with us today. What's thriving evidence look like? How are we expanding credit for learning outside of the classroom in ways that help young people thrive? And in this conversation, Karen's going to lead the discussion, where we're really going to look at the current landscape of state and local policies that allow students to get credit for learning in all the places and spaces where it happens. So I'm going to be welcoming in a moment, not just yet, Karen Pittman, who's the founding partner here at Knowledge to Power Catalyst, Andrew Frishman with Big Picture Learning, where he serves as a co-executive director of that work, Peter McWalters, who is the former commissioner of elementary and secondary education in the state of Rhode Island, and Alexis Steines Rao, vice president of innovation and outreach with the Afterschool Alliance. To get us into this conversation today, we're going to share one of my favorite videos, which is a piece that was done by a student with Big Picture Learning, Gianna, really talking about the importance of building her own pathway throughout that learning ecosystem, and how the Big Picture Learning School really helped her to do that. And she really kind of presents it as a challenge to schools to become more adept at being opportunity hubs that both have powerful learning opportunities within the school building, within the classroom, as well as out in the community. So we're going to turn it over to Gianna first via video, and then Karen, Andrew, Peter, and Alexis will join us on screen.
Hi, my name is Gianna, and I'm a senior in high school. Did you know that one student drops out of high school every 12 seconds in the U.S.? When I found this out, I wanted to know why. According to the research I did, students drop out for 4 main reasons: bad grades, family issues, behavior issues, and just not being interested in school. That all makes sense, but I think there are some deeper reasons too. Schools try to fit us all into the same mold. Either you fit in or you drop out. But we're not all the same. We have our own interests and passions, and we want schools to understand that. We don't want to be told what should be important to us. We want to learn through what is important to us. To me, it all comes down to expectations. We know that schools have expectations of students. Standards and test scores. Sure, those things are important, but what about our expectations of school? What do we expect? We expect relationships. We want our teachers to respect us and know what our interests and passions are. We expect a relevant education. What we learn should matter to us and to others. We expect choice. My passion is the performing arts, so I started working with the Young Actors Studio at a local theater. I learned about improv and other acting techniques. I read plays, put on performances, and my school gave me credit for it. We expect a challenge, like when my friend's mentor at the hospital really challenged her to learn more about patient care. So she went and got her CNA. Now she has an after-school job in a field she's passionate about, and she's planning to pursue medicine in college. I have a friend who started her own business. She developed a product where she makes bags out of recycled magazines, and now she's developing a business plan and marketing her product as an entrepreneur. Another friend of mine started off not really caring about school. Then he found an internship with Play Out Loud, a fitness program which helps everyone get healthy. Now he runs his own personal training program for other students and is planning to head to college in the fall. So, what changed? He cared about what he was doing. The key is engagement. If our nation wants to stop the dropout crisis, schools have to make sure that we are connected to the things that matter to us. We want to be engaged in our learning. If schools give us a chance to do that, we'll go beyond their standards. Sure, without engagement, some students still manage to get by and graduate, but they haven't learned to think for themselves. They're used to being told what to learn, and it's not preparation for life. How do we set up schools to create productive learners? How can schools keep students really interested in learning? When I think about when I have been most interested in my learning, the best and most deep experiences took place outside of school. My internship at the theater, my summer acting program, and after-school dance classes, these are the things that connected me to a community of people who are passionate and know a lot about my interests. I was able to use the world as my classroom. It's funny to think that by letting students leave school to learn, you're actually making sure they stay in school. Want more ideas for keeping us engaged, excited, and in school? Check out Leaving to Learn.
Thanks, Tracy. And while you're getting the spotlight ready, I'll jump in and say how excited I am to be on the call with all of you. It's a small but mighty group, and I'm just excited to spend this hour with you. I want to start by just saying we really are centering youth thriving for a reason. We think the intersection between the science of learning and development and the science of adolescent development really gives us the ammunition that we need, not to use a military term, to really move forward to get these systems working together in a very different way. And so I want to start just by giving you a quick quote from the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. They did a book back in 2019 called The Promise of Adolescence. And I'm going to read it with all the drama it deserves. Adolescent brains are not simply advanced child brains, nor are they immature adult brains. They're specifically tailored to meet the needs of this stage of life. Adolescents must explore and take risks to build the cognitive, social, and emotional skills they need to be productive adults. This adolescent imperative is what we're really trying to focus on. When we talk about schools K-12, often we talk about K-12, and we don't underscore the huge developmental differences that happen between 6 and 18. We don't also acknowledge that we know now that adolescent development goes into the mid-20s. The brain really is still growing and moving. There's a lot of time left for young people to get back on track or back on a path that makes sense to them. And we need to really bring that into our conversations about how we're going to reimagine, rethink, reinvent schools. And we need to do that in a way that talks about how we do this in partnership with organizations that are in the community doing this work. So today we're really going to focus in on an organization, big picture, that started 25 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, something a long time ago, that really started by talking to young people like Kiana to say, what is it that you want to learn? And then they figured out how to take those conversations into regular public schools to say, how can we take the money that you have? How can we take the structures that you have, but flip it inside out so that young people are really going out into their community to learn? So Andrew, that video was made 11 years ago. A lot has happened since then, but it's still one of my favorites. And so talk to us a little bit about the origin story behind Big Picture.
Yeah, thanks so much, Karen. And I'm really just excited. It's a privilege to get to be here together, like with you, with Peter, with Alexis, for what I'm excited about the conversation. And thanks for leading off with that video. It actually was created based on a book that Dr. Elliot Washer, who's one of the co-founders with Dennis Lickey of Big Picture, wrote just a little over 10 years ago. We were founded actually in 1995. That was one of the questions. So we're coming up on our 30-year anniversary. That book came out in, I think, 2013. And I think what's you asked sort of about the origin, and I think there's sort of these common, consistent essence of where Big Picture comes from. And what that is that about 30 years ago or so, the Annenberg Institute provided a major sort of challenge grant that went through Brown University to try to really reinvent and reimagine sort of public education in the United States. And it worked. And that's why all of us don't have to be here or do any of our. No, actually, it did not turn out to be quite so utopian as many people expected or hoped. But Dennis Lickey and Elliot Washer were brought to Providence, Rhode Island by Ted Sizer at the time, who had launched the Coalition of Essential Schools. He was really looking to try to rethink sort of particularly secondary school and what it could look like. And Dennis and Elliot were brought as fellows and began to do a whole set of research, really trying to understand like what's sort of the user experience for young people as they're students in high school, for their families, for potential employers. Like, how are people thinking and feeling about high school? And universally, what they heard back from students, and again, remember, this is 30 years ago, was that, like I go there because my family says I got to go, and I get to see my friends, so it's not that bad. And there's a handful of stuff that's all right. But most of the time, I'm kind of bored. And like it's not really providing me opportunities to really do stuff that I love and care about. It's not particularly related to what I'm interested in doing. They don't really ask me what I do outside of school. And I'm not sure it's getting me ready for the world after. And I think what's a little eerie about this is that, um, you know, 20 years later, Elliot was still writing this book, Leaving to Learn. And now, like some of the most recent survey data that's out by Gallup is saying that like we're actually at unprecedented low levels of student engagement and sort of lack of invigoration, if you will. So Big Picture was really created first as sort of a response to that and sort of saying like, well, what would the opposite of that look like? Like, what would it look like if young people were really well known? Because I think that's the other piece I'll just add is that particularly a lot of schools are sort of pretty large bureaucratic institutions, and they can be somewhat dehumanizing. And young people will say, like, I'm not particularly known there. I don't feel particularly connected. There's not that high a sense of belonging. And it's also, I think, a little scary, the number of kids who say, like, there aren't any adults in that building who know me, right? So Big Picture was a response to all of these things. And the question was like, well, if you could invent what a high school might look like, what would it look like? And so they're basically, Dennis's background is as a clinical psychologist. Elliot's background is really in career and technical education. The Metropolitan Regional Career and Technical Center was the first high school that is in the Big Picture Learning Network. And I see Peter smiling because he played a vitally key role as the commissioner of elementary and secondary education in Rhode Island at that time. Without that, the school really would not exist. There's also support, again, from the Annenberg Institute, support from Stanley Goldstein, one of the founders of CVS Corporation and the business community. So a bunch of folks came together and said, we're going to create a school where young people are known. And an advisory program. Dennis had been involved in creating some of the first advisories. So really deep, rich advisory programs combined with getting young people out into the real world for internship experiences. And that means if all the kids are learning different stuff, you got to have a variety of ways to assess what they're learning. So that really brought us in the direction of competency-based assessment. And I'm glad that Peter is stepping here into the spotlight because again, there wouldn't be a spotlight to step into if he had not been playing a key role at the state. And then for many, many years, sort of blocking and tackling and snow plowing and helicoptering to make sure that that school could continue to grow. And then out of that, there are now over 150 Big Picture schools around the U.S. and another 112 countries. So, Peter, do you want to share a little bit, maybe? Or Karen, did you have a particular question you wanted to toss to him? Oh, you're muted, but I lip read. So I think she said, Peter, if you want to chime in.
Oh, no. Okay. Very good. A couple of things. The timing, there had already been enough questioning going on in the state as I came in as a new commissioner that was seeking a change process. In other words, there was a demand kind of in the air and in the politics. And I got very good counsel when I was leaving Rochester to not bring an answer, but to bring an environment of searching for the creation of the alternatives. Whether that was by luck or not, I put all of my energy into doing all, like Karen, like you do, giving the evidence of why the need was there and some of the evidence of the emerging possibilities and good practice. But basically saying, folks, you have to own this at the local level. And we put years into supporting what I would call community engagement at the parent and community level. And by coincidence, the state had already decided to rethink its career and technical schools. And they had already finished one, the Davies one. And they had very, very good partnerships with places like corporations that took over the technical side of that so that everything in this place would be current and up to grade. And I was, just by luck, was in the position of creating the next one, which means, importantly, that I didn't have to take over a school and get it to go there. We got that unique opportunity to open the next career and technical school and redesign what the words meant. And I think that's one of those, coincidences of timing where the right commissioner in the right place with the right capacity already decided in the sense of being able to get it done. And then because of the environment, Andrew was just talking about Ted Sizer and the Annenberg Institute and Andrew, Steve, what's his name? Goldstein, Stan, the head of CVS. So think about that. Ted Sizer already has national standing. Obviously, CVS, headquartered in Rhode Island, means when the corporate giant speaks, if nothing else, you get out of the way, you listen. So with a few little corners like that, we were able to get this conversation started. And then by engaging in the city itself, we went and found council people and the mayor. We found a couple of legislators who were very much into education and rethinking it in both a critical and a supportive way. So we had a core group of people that you could sit with regularly and set up the kind of the conditions for the planning process. And that's the only reason it got off the ground so quickly. And then a couple of things that I think are just, again, these good leadership by certain people at the right time. We finally got the approval to go with that program, but the building had to be built. And Dennis, smart man, Dennis Litkey, said, if we wait for that building to be open, this program will never happen. We have to make this happen tomorrow. We went and got 50 kids, and we opened the first program in the education department's building on the second or third floor, right in the middle of the University of Rhode Island's educational training program. And within a year and a half of that, there was already enough evidence and support and parent engagement and even legislative review that you couldn't stop it as easily it would have been as if there hadn't been any evidence. Whenever you needed to show evidence, you marched the students in, their business partnership in, and we had that kind of momentum. And I think that's enough of that piece of that. But I do think some of the elements of this is we still end up just as a program. And even at scale, we're a program. And if this conversation is about the issues of how do you really get to the full images of what we're all now calling, reimagined education, a community engagement, then this idea of finding those critical lead players that I found, and then creating what you use the word permission, in other words, it's a command by demand that we do something. And here's the frameworks, but this is not a 3-step process. I'm not going to run you through 4 demands and make this happen. So you have to create your graduation by proficiency standards. And we ran statewide workshops for years, 3 to 5 years, not forcing, but inviting and supporting departments to have interdepartmental meetings around what the rubrics of good enough is, which is taking, Karen, your image of youth development and the science of learning and turning that into statements that teachers could own and share and make public. And we supported their exhibition mid-year and final exhibition productions. And that was very, very messy. I got the National Center for Education, National Center for the Assessment, Improving Assessment out in New Hampshire. And they worked with high school teachers for 2 or 3 years. And my point is, we took the opportunity of the demand with a couple of bold examples like the Met getting opened, getting it done, building the infrastructure kind of as we went around business relationships. So we had internships. We put full-time people in charge of finding those and coordinating them. And this is just one little program. So I think my point in all of this is the coming at this as a community organizing effort and finding the champions that are already there, whether it's coming out of the youth development side, or the museum and education side, the social justice side. There are already people trying to do this. And to the extent that either a superintendent or a commissioner or other community leaders can start the hosting of those meetings, and you can't assume it's going to be education. Education is sometimes the reluctant partner, but as you said in the report, an essential partner. It's too essential to fail. So we've got to take that command of this is where the kids are. This is where there's financing and authority and structure. And yet we've got to open the door to participatory learning in terms of the kids learning all the time, in and out of school. We've got to resolve the assessment infrastructure of that and the credentialing infrastructure of that. And the difference between now and then is that there's all kinds of wonderful examples. The three workshops you ran before this one, the examples, the Pittsburgh discussion, I think was wonderful. Community share. I think the Las Cruces one, in every one of them had examples that all pros, as in people, they didn't start this last year. Some of these are 15 and 20 years of working a community and building the alliances and then taking on each of the issues, as in what constitutes good learning? How do you credential it? Where's the money coming from? Who's providing the coordination for transportation? This is an incredibly complicated exercise that we're going into. And each one of those components has its own infrastructure, their own regulations, their own rules and guidance. And providing support to a table of leadership, and I mean people embedded leadership, and then working that into the mayor's office and the governor's office and the business leadership offices is a dynamic that's iterative and always has to be maintained. It's never, quote, institutionalized. But I think we know so much more about that now, and we have so many examples already going on that things like this have to be brought up, shined lights on, generalizations made, and I'm past having to prove anything. We've got the evidence, we've got the examples, we've got the students, and we've got the placements. Here I am 25 years later, and Big Picture Learning, through this partnership in Australia, has a whole new frame of reference of what the outcomes ought to be, and it's articulated in ways that are interdisciplinary. It accounts for all of this, quote, standards conversation. They have experience now of how you anchor those exhibitions in ways that pass the psychometrics test. So it is now not only doable, there's evidence that it's being done. And I think you've got the right series of questions on here. I was the right player granting permission first, utilizing the authority to take the risk and then protect the risk takers. And I've always told, and I say this to everybody I do this with, when I go in and deal with a high school that's in rebellion, I'll go into I'll close a room with teacher leadership and say, it's not negotiable only in the sense we're already failing. I'm inviting you into something that I'm giving you the resources to do it, the support to cover what you do. And literally, I say, as long as you, in good faith, step towards that work, you stay on that task in good faith and do what you can do, and I will cover you back, and every success is yours and every failure is mine. You can't fail me. You can only fail yourself. And I find the community building and the ethos that this has to be done on behalf of the children, the public good, public schools, public funding. This is not about choice in that sense.
Right. Wonderful, Peter. And I know once we get you started,
I know it's
lay out everything for us. So I'm going to back up a little bit. That was amazing. and ask Andrew, for people that don't know big picture, it's an approach, and it has some non-negotiables in the approach. You bring that approach into the school, into the community, and say, you've got to figure out how to make it work here, but you've got some non-negotiables. And I think it's really important, picking up on what Peter said about big picture started without a building. Couldn't wait for the building. So you had no choice but to put young people out into the community to learn. What did that take? How did you take those same public dollars, those same public school standards, and put young people out of the community for all their learning? How did that happen? What are the pieces that have to be there?
Yeah, thanks so much. And Peter gets me going too. If you see, like I'm get animated here and tossing stuff in the chat. I think I'm glad to hear you sort of describe big picture learning as an approach, because that's a piece in a way that we really think about it. It's not really so much of a prescriptive model where we say it's got to look exactly this way, right? And it really starts with a few fundamental underlying assumptions about learning that says, first, like learning is relational, right? It's about young people getting into relationship with adults. Second, that it's about their interests, right? It's if there's the drive, this is the whole like, it's the lighting of a fire, it's the sparks, it's not about the filling up of the bucket or the banking model. And then third, that it's about like real practical, like transferable skills. Like what are you learning that you're going to be able to apply in your life? The job of school should not be to get you good at school. It should be to help you thrive as an adult. And so if you start from those assumptions, and I think also with the other key assumption that like a lot of the best learning is not going to happen in the school. It's going to happen out in the real world. Like if you start with those things, and there's sort of some simple underlying assumptions, what you build and design in terms of like what the learning experiences will be like for young people follow out of that. And so just to be clear, like, we are not in terms of the way in which we've grown, we are not a colonial, imperial, evangelical, capitalist entrepreneurial organization that sits around with some kind of strategic growth plan. And it's like, we're going to get to 30 more cities in the next 5 years. Like that's not the way that our growth has happened. We don't have that kind of sort of like sales department that's going out there trying to push into districts. The way in which our growth has happened is that people have written about what's happening for young people and educators and communities in our schools. And other people say, hey, we'd really like to have you come here and do that. And our response is like, no, we're not going to come there and do that to you. What we will do is it sounds like you're really interested in this. Like, do you want to help launch a big picture school in your community? Well, who else do you know? Like, can we help you find the group of people in and from your community that we can work with? Like, we're going to be the spotter, but you're going to do the heavy lifting and develop the muscles, because that's the only way that it will be long-term sustainable. So I think a key thing to think about the way in which we've gone about our growth is that we are neither extractive, like we're not trying to set ourselves up. We're not a for-profit organization. We're a mission-driven impact organization. So we're not trying to set ourselves up, and gratitude to our board, Peter being a board chair emeritus, but also all of our board members. We're not putting pressure on us to be like, well, how much money are you driving to the bottom line? Like that's not our primary motivating factor. But on the flip side, like we're not set up as an organization that's trying to bring a bunch of resources and inject them into communities. Our goal is to work with communities so they build that muscle, build that capacity. And to your point, Karen, are leveraging like the same set of resources, right? Of that 150 plus schools in the big picture network, 90 some odd percent of those are in district schools that are using exactly the same dollars and resources as any other sort of off the shelf district school. It's about reallocating the time and the resources and how you're spending that time. It's not about a whole bunch of additional resources that are necessary to do that. So right. I'll just say, hopefully that's helpful. And you did use the word sort of non-negotiables. I'd actually say that like, we have a clear set of what we call our 10 distinguishers. I'll put those into the link to those into the chat for folks to check out. But those are more sort of like kind of design elements that we've found to be highly effective when you are implementing a big picture approach. However, we're not sort of sitting back and saying as judge and jury, like, you're not doing them well enough, you're out of the network. Like the idea is either like there are schools that are exemplary, sort of established schools that are doing all these distinguishers great. Most of them are still working on some, right? And so it's a question of like, are you working to improve in these areas? And that's the way that we really approach all of our schools is like, they're going through their own evolutions in response to the environment that they're
right, so I'm going to give you one more chance, Andrew, to be very concrete.
Oh boy.
So that people understand this. Go to Providence, how you set it up. There was no building, 50 kids. Yes. The commitment was those kids are going to go out and find real life experiences that could work for them. You were somehow going to go out and make sure that the people that they connect to really understand learning and development and what they should be doing with those young people. So really this question of how do you make sure that the places that you're sending kids are ready to really work with those kids?
Yeah.
And then you had the job of bringing them back to say, when they said, this is what I think I learned, I'm going to reflect on it. You had to figure out how to translate that back into basic academic standards. Those things are the things that are barriers. So how did you make, in Providence, who did that? Who did that translation work to make sure that the young person went out to an experience that was interesting for them, but really was going to be a quality learning experience? Who helped you bring it back to help them reflect on what they learned? How did you then translate their real world competencies into academic standards and get credit for it? And how did you do all that with the same amount of money? 1 minute to say that.
1 minute. Okay. The super short answer. So I spent 5 years as a conventional teacher. I taught like math and science, and my job was like, chapter 4, get that content into this kid's head, create the quizzes and tests, like test them on that, grade those tests and quizzes, put them into spreadsheets and spit back grades. When I moved over and became an advisor at a big picture school, and it's a non-trivial semantic difference, like non-semantic difference. It's a different word. You're not a teacher. You're not a purveyor of curriculum content. You're an advisor, truly like guide on the side, work with you. First, you got to get to know every kid well. So as an advisor, my job and role was meet with every kid, ideally in their home with their family to understand who they are and where they're coming from, find out what they're interested in, help support them in finding these different work-based learning experiences, meet with them and their mentor at these employment sites or at these sites, help co-design projects that the kids would work on, and then work with the mentors to understand, like, well, how are they making progress against this? And so it's a different role for the educator. And so the answer is like, it is teachers, but their job is different. Their fundamental responsibility is about relational connectedness with the kid, interest and engagement, and then competency-based assessment. And that means you are truly supplanting some of their role. To do this effectively, you can't take a standard sort of off the rack, 8-period day or block schedule high school and just say, oh yeah, and we're going to do this. It's going to be a nice little garnish. No, like, maybe that would someday work somewhere. I have never seen that work very well. You're like the quality of those interest-driven work-based learning experiences will be directly proportional to the degree to which you allocate educators' time, energy, and focus to truly supporting, scaffolding, and co-designing those learning and evaluation experiences. And if you don't do that, the whole thing's going to be kind of mediocre. Like that is what is required. Is that concrete enough, Karen?
Yes, that wasn't short enough, but it was good.
Thank you.
And
we'll fix it in post-production. We'll edit it down.
It's so important for people to understand that because you're taking the same dollars and your term that says teachers became advisors is critical. And young people say that to us. When we did an interview with EL Education and Ron Berger a couple of years ago, a podcast, we said, they don't call them teachers. I mean, we have teachers who teach us content, and then we have advisors who help us new projects in the real world. Both of them are important, but the young people see that as different roles. I'm going to get Alexis on the screen. She's going to tell us how, from a policy perspective, opportunities to do this kind of credit for learning work are happening across the country. And I know one of the places that you focus on is Providence and Rhode Island. So take it away, Alexis, and tell us why we should be optimistic that while every state doesn't have a Peter, every state has something in place that can help people move forward.
Sure. Thank you, Karen, for having me today. I'm excited to talk about this subject because it's one of the exciting innovations that we're tracking here at the Afterschool Alliance, trying to look at new ideas that help push the after-school and summer learning fields forward. And we perceive credit for learning as one of those areas where after school can truly make a huge impact in education. It's not necessarily a new concept. A decade ago, the Nellie Mae Foundation was funding the New England states to look at these opportunities to try and pilot them. New Hampshire and Rhode Island were two states where this really did pick up some traction. Additionally, there's the whole digital badging movement, which was applying a credential for skills and knowledge that were learned within after-school programs. So there have been these efforts over the years. And for us, this was really important to try and understand what the policy landscape looks like so that we can find ways to help continue to push and spread these opportunities forward. I'm going to quickly share a single slide that kind of gives a description of what the patchwork quilt of opportunities across the country look like. So on the screen here, this is what to date we at the Alliance have been able to track in terms of the legislative and regulatory landscape for what these credit-bearing opportunities in the out-of-school time space look like. I will say that this is a work in progress because where these opportunities may be written within state law or state regulation or just in practice, because not every state
Mm-hmm.
has something on the books,
Right.
it's a little all over the place. So we're working at trying to dig down and figure out exactly what's happening. So what you see on the screen may not 100% match what is going on in your state. And if not, please, by all means, ping me, let me know, because I want to make sure that we have this as accurate as possible. But as you can see on the map, it's varied. Some states do have legislation or regulation on the book that allow for credit opportunities outside of the school day, covering a gamut of topics ranging anywhere from work-based learning to arts and sciences, generally complementary to what's happening during the school day. In other states, it's more of a focus on service learning, community service opportunities. You can receive some kind of credit for participating in that. Some states, it's more of an independent study type program where youth can do something that's a little bit more self-directed. It really and truly depends on where you are and what's been put into practice. And in states where it says that there's no current legislation or regulation, that doesn't necessarily preclude programs, after school programs, community-based organizations from partnering with school districts, as long as there's nothing in the state law that says you can't do that. But you have superintendent, you have a school principal, high school principal, that's interested in partnering and finding ways to be able to provide those credit-bearing opportunities to work with them. I mean, Rhode Island is one of the examples that I cite all the time for not having legislation or regulation on the books for this, but rather it became a practice that was established through their Department of Education and has continued through their all-course network, which allows youth throughout the state to be able to access a course catalog of these out-of-school time learning opportunities that cover a variety of topics to appeal to all kinds of interests, where youth can be able to participate in these out-of-school engagement and learning opportunities.
So, Alexis, what I hear you saying is that we've got a continuum. We've got schools like Big Picture, in which young people during the school day, every day, are going out into the community and are getting full credit for that learning because the articulation between what they're learning in the real world is being monitored by their advisor and is then being translated back into academic standards. That's 100% going out to learn, leaving to learn. Then we've got opportunities for young people to get extra credit, service credit, supporting learning. But we still have this challenge of how much is that learning going to be brought into school, and how much of the core academic content that young people are still sitting in chairs saying, I wish I understood how this is relevant for me. How much of that is being moved out into the community space, or when they find an example to go do a STEM program, a science program, or whatever, can we come back and say, I did this. I think I really learned something. How can I demonstrate my knowledge and get credit for it? So we've got a range of things to go, but it's exciting to hear that there are opportunities across the country. Bethany just dropped something in. Example of state level policy in Washington has enabled significant flexibility. We've got a lot of wonderful people on the screen, not so many. I'm happy to open up the screen and have a conversation. I've got lots more questions for them, but I'm also happy to get you guys on the screen and talking if you want to. So Tracy, can we just make this a little large Brady Bunch and see if people have conversations that they want to have for the last 10 minutes or so?
I'm happy to ask a question, Karen.
Yep, go for it.
Thank you so much. This is really so helpful. And it's wonderful to see these leaders who've been doing this work in so many different settings for so long, bringing this knowledge together for us. I've been a fan of Peter's work there for a long time, and obviously Big Picture. I love what you dropped in the chat, Andrew. It's really helpful because I'm trying to get my head around what are the enabling conditions, what are the policy conditions. And what we frequently get told is it's about things not happening, like no more state testing is like the biggest thing. But I see you pointing to things like Carnegie Unit, seat time. And so I want to ask two related things. One is, are there other pieces that you're like, if states would do more of X, it would make a big difference? And relatedly, Peter, if you were sitting in a state chief role right now, what would be your first 3 moves that you'd make to help this kind of work grow?
Well, I can tell you that in the sense that it hasn't changed much. As you do these things, there's 2 other things you have to anticipate supporting. One is in the early days of MET, the time that the intern person, the mentor was providing, was basically covered by the place that owned the person. In other words, it was volunteer work, and that's pretty much a known model. So you get a kid that gets an internship that gets them access to a hospital research place. But when you move this idea into the institutionally the way we're talking about it, we have to be, because Karen keeps using the same dollar when she asks about doing this with the same dollars. We weren't buying the time of the mentor. But in the real world, if this goes to scale, there has to be thinking through that when you take somebody's time, whether it's an artist out there or a business person dedicating time to or whatever, there's got to be some anticipation of the cost that is to both sides and how we anticipate how that gets paid for. That's the first piece. The other one has to do with this issue of, if we keep the conversation about getting credentialing, a translation back to quote the standards, but using those in conventional ways around testing, it's a dead end before we get there. You've got to provide an enormous amount of energy at the local level in terms of what does this graduate look like? What are the behaviors, the skill sets, the socio-emotional kinds of things, the collaboration piece, the civics component of behavior? Those things have to be brought up in a higher value and described in ways that look like, quote, a rubric. And they have to be shared among the network people. So when we start giving, quote, credit for us for accomplishing whatever the internship or the social project or whatever it is out there, that it has a familiarity that has a kind of a community value that finally breaks us away from all that's good, but just show me the test. All that's great, but just show me the test. These other skill sets have to be brought up in profile, particularly, and this is coming out of the Australian exercise, it's turning out those are the most powerful ones to predict future success. The test becomes a static measure, whereas the changes in everything from my agency, my social emotional capacity, my civic engagement, my human capital networking kinds of thing, those are the components that we have to bring up as research elements or data elements and show that these programs, as students begin to acquire these components, reflect on them, internalize them, and own them, that is where the agency is. That'll take somebody who never thought they wanted to be in the deep sciences, but through the passion of what they've learned on the edges of that, have drawn them into wanting courses in deep physics kind of thing. And I'm making that extreme only because there's no magic to the learning once I want it. But to set it up as a precondition before I can even talk about it is a dead end. And that's the institution we currently represent.
Right. And I think it's so important, and Michelle Cahill and her colleagues from XQ talked about this on the last webinar that we did. It's so important to understand that we've got people like XQ, not just XQ, that have done the hard work of setting up these very intentional competency-based rubrics. They are all about observable skills. They're all done from sort of, I'm exploring to I've mastered. And they're set up across 5 large outcome goals for young people that don't artificially separate the social and emotional from the academic. And that's where we have to be right now. We have to have rubrics that say, I have learned these things. Why am I learning these things that are relevant for me? The competencies are all in I statements about what I can do. And the XQ did the hard work of doing the back end to map the state's academic standards into these competencies. Now we can do that with AI now, et cetera. But that's going to be the breaking point. How do we help school systems that have not moved away from the Carnegie unit understand that it's not just about seat time, it's about the way content is presented, and it's about the time constraint. It's not just the credit, it's the time, and it's the releasing of the content to trust that content can be learned in experiential ways, and then you can test for it. And we've got some of those mechanisms happening now that we have to expand on. So I think it's just really important at this moment, as we're thinking about how we're going to reimagine school, how we're going to get to schools or opportunity hubs, something that really expands and ignites and gives young people credit for being in the ecosystem, is we need to get that excitement going first. with schools that are still in the regular space. And again, Big Picture has done this with regular public schools.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important. Now we've got enough of this happening. We have to say, how do we then take this exciting idea? Understand there's going to be even more variation, but have in a community a commitment to really thinking about how this goes forward. That's what Education Reimagined is trying to figure out. Not
That's right.
how do we do this? How do we build a brand new thing over here? That's nice. But how do we come into places that have already gotten the bug of this learner-centered, community-based education and help them then tackle what comes next? How do we
Karen,
get to every kid?
I don't want to take us off because this, I completely, I agree with this. But just to get it on the table, one of the big resistance to this, because it is so rationally clear, but some of the embedded resistance is we've allowed ourselves to create a larger culture that still has race and class and zero-sum game motivations in it. Whether it's the bureaucracy kind of holding on to its power, doesn't want to share it, or somehow if we do this for them, then we're not going to do it enough for me. Those culturally normed embedded biases are enormously important to understand that when you step toward this, you're scraping the edge of some of the most profound biases and antisocial norms that I can imagine. And that we represent that institutionally. And you have to know that going in, because you're going to trigger the response as soon as you really push the equity, access, and fairness credentialing.
Karen, could I just ask, and I want to make sure that if folks have got, questions or comments, either, in the chat or just come off mute or throw up whatever sort of emojis you're interested in. I'm grateful to be on this call with, Alexis and really highlight the way in which it just seems like such a false barrier to define in school and after school, right? I think that when we're talking about, the goal is really for young people to get to have interest-driven experiences that are, connected to the real world, that help them figure out who they want to be in the future, right? And so I've heard Michael Nakula has called it possibility development. How do we open up a broader array of possibilities for young people? And that's going to be about did they get to explore the things they're interested in? Did they get to connect with adults who actually work in those fields, right? It's going to be a combination of the skills they pick up and really the social capital that's created of who are they connected with. So, I was seeing, grateful on the call. I think Shannon Epner was on a little bit ago, Big Thought down in Texas and down the Dallas area. And they do a bunch of work, particularly for young people outside of school in the arts and entrepreneurship, right? And then Fort Worth School District was wait a minute, we got a bunch of kids who are really disengaged. You find ways to get kids super engaged. Could you connect with us? And so Big Thought, we've been privileged to connect with them sort of in that kind of alternative ed space. That's what I mean, these liminal spaces in a way. I was grateful to see Susie Kagahiro on here. Stewart Foundation has provided support to Big Picture to work particularly with alternative education schools across the state of California. And I think those alternative education spaces where kids are right on the edge of staying enrolled in school because they've kind of not experienced success in more conventional environments, that's a place where there's at least a lot more tolerance and hopefully some acceptance of young people pushing the literal physical boundaries of the classroom. So I wanted to mention that because I think it's about where is learning happening? When is the learning happening? We talked a little bit in a previous conversation of if you're a young person and you might want to become a pastry chef and a baker, you're going to probably have to go. And I speak from experience. A number of our students were interning. I got to eat some of the best croissants in my life because they were getting to the bakery at 4 a.m. and they were there from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. and they put in 6 hours, right? But they were learning how to become really exquisite chefs. On the flip side, I had students in that same advisory who were working in the theater and performing arts and were at they showed up at 4 p.m. and they were there till 10 p.m. because that's when theater happens, right? And so I think we have to look beyond the bounds of time and space and place, right? And think about where that's happening. And I think ideally we break down that false barrier between what's inside of school, what's outside of school, and we say no, it's about the things you're picking up. And also I want to highlight one other piece of over time, we've built this education system that's so technocratic and so focused on these tiny little bites of content, knowledge, curriculum, and data that we've dehumanized the level of social connection. It's really about the relationships that are formed and connected. Like I've been privileged to stay really closely connected with the students who I've taught 20 years ago at the Met in Providence. And that enriches like my life. And I also know that like the things that they're doing now are related to the people they met when they were in high school. Like the kids who interned in hospitals are now administrators in those hospitals. The kids who interned with environmental firms are now national level policy people in environment. Like that would not have happened. The kids who interned in daycares are now like full teachers in a daycare. The kid who interned in a barbershop now is the owner of a barbershop. Like those things don't happen unless the school values that and says like we care about what you do while you're here, but also while you're beyond this place. So I don't know. I wanted to highlight that. I saw Craig McClay on here, like thinking about who you're connected with. That social capital not only is an individual asset for each young person, but as a collective benefit across the whole community. Like if we want to get to equity, we got to connect young people and adults across lines of socioeconomic difference. Like that is what will strengthen our communities. Like that's what Robert Putnam talked about, and all of his work with Bowling Alone and more like recently. But oh my gosh, I think I scared off Karen and drove her out of here. But someone's got to moderate this conversation. So who else has got stuff they want to sort of chime in? I see stuff in the chat.
And Andrew, I will say.
Go ahead, Alexis, please.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, Andrew, the kid who had the opportunity to intern at the state capitol is sitting here talking about the policy pieces. So yes, it is so vitally important to be out there and finding other ways in school. I did want to point out one other thing, though, in terms of some of the policy and best practices around this, is making sure that you have those critical conversations with school administrators. We really do talk about a best practice about trying to build up those relationships with teachers during the school day to showcase that this is not supplanting what they are doing, but this is in many cases enriching and supplementing the work that they're doing. There's a lot of we found that there is a lot of hostile resistance if you do not bring the educators, if you do not bring teachers into these conversations. They are key partners. They are a part of this because we do want to see this continuum. It's not just about after school time. It's not just about the school day. It's about all of this and how do these all work together. So I did just want to highlight that as well as something that we also really try to talk about.
That's great, Alexis. And we'll take that as your closing sentence, and I'll get a closing sentence if I can from Peter and Andrew, but I'll offer mine, which is, Peter, I'm really glad you brought up the equity question and the race and class questions, because if we can't figure out how to do this with the time and space that's currently being held sacred by schools, we're never going to get to equity. We can't do it after hours. We can't do it in the summer. Those things can all be there, but the schools have the monopoly on the day. And until they can release that time or giving people credit for working from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m., it's not going to happen. And so we have to keep pushing in that front. But Andrew and Peter, I'm going to let you say a brief last word. This has been a wonderful conversation. We could go on for another hour. And we're going to come back more to just hear about what we're going to do in the next series from Rita. But Andrew, quick last word, last sentence, last phrase.
Let's just do it and do it just. I've pontificated and bloviated a ton, but Peter, your thoughts?
Well, the first part is, and Karen, you went to this a little while ago. Andrew did. The orientation to this is such a mindset change that we got to keep supporting that in the conversations of point of departure, because you can still go down rabbit holes of incremental change. So that perspective is the first piece. And the other one is to realize there's already wonderful people out there doing this wonderful work right now. And as we go out to do this, it is liberation. It's liberation in the sense we're not bringing a radical change to something. We're finding the change already going on embedded in communities. And that is our point of departure and our support, our strength. You can't lose that battle if you support it appropriately.
That's great. We just have to stay focused on learning. That's the magic word. Not structure, but learning. Rita, take us home.
thank you for an incredibly rich conversation. I just want to emphasize, and for most of you have been a part of this Center Youth Thriving discussion with us for some months now, and it's not just these webinars and conversations. We also have some small teams that are working on this, and so this is just an invite to anybody who's interested in really continuing this conversation. Alexis, Lauren Beerbaum, who helped to develop did the heavy lifting on the XQ competency framework. Michelle Gambone, you mentioned Big Picture in Dallas. Greg, some others have been coming together to really say what is some work that we could do with those of us who are interested in this kind of credit for learning, and really both amplifying this conversation and also influencing, being at tables where this work is really happening. So we have a small kind of working group that's just at the point of sort of saying, hey, who else, right? So Dan, I know we're at the Youth Development Policy Table conversation tomorrow, and we'll be asking if there are others in that group that want to be a part of this kind of credit for learning working group. If anybody on this wants to, you've got my email there, just send me a note and we'll reach out and loop you in to to this kind of informal but very roll up their sleeves, stone soup kind of group that is trying to say, how do we keep these ideas and examples really moving in the broader conversations around credit for learning. We are also going to be having more webinars. This is the official closing webinar, but really we're going to keep these going as well, really zooming in on what do we know about the science of adolescence and how that informs how we're thinking about ecosystems. And we focused on a lot of the things that are really starting with schools and looking at how to help schools turn outward. We're also going to highlight some of those systems that have really been built in kind of alternate spaces like the core network, to look at how they've really created powerful pathways and helping young people navigate the ecosystem, and other examples like that help us see more how people are structuring this, more of those examples that are really out there in the community. Thank you all for joining today. Keep on this journey with us. We appreciate you and what you do each and every day for young people.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.